guys, today we're going to be looking at a small aspect of color theory, but I really want to show you the difference between global color adjustments and localized color adjustments. And for this we're going to look at the HSL tab in Lightroom as well as our calibration tab in Lightroom. So to do this you can use any software that you edit with. However, for the example of this demonstration, and I think most of you guys use, we're going to be using Lightroom. So first thing to remember is that we use a RGB color space for editing. This is red, green and blue, and mixing these three colors together we get all the colors that make up our color space. So we're going to be focusing on how red, green and blue are affected either globally or locally when we edit our photos. Red, green and blue are our RGB color space, and if we open up our HSL tab in Lightroom, we will see that if we reduce the saturation on red or increase the saturation, the red changes saturation. Same thing with the green. If we change the slider on saturation for the green, only the green is affected, and we increase or decrease the saturation on the green. Same thing for the blue. If we move the blue slider, only affecting the blue when we are adjusting saturation. So this is under HSL. This is looking at red, green and blue. And this is, like I said, will be our localized adjustments. And this will make more sense once we start editing the images. But I just want you to focus on how these three colors, red, green and blue, are changed when we adjust the settings under saturation, and when we come down to calibration, how they change. Now, so calibration colors work very differently. Instead of them being localized to just red, green or blue, they actually affect more of the global colors across the spectrum, and you'll see that when I get onto the color wheel shortly. But if we just take, for example, the blue primary and we increase the saturation or decrease the saturation, I think what you notice is that it's not just affecting the blue channel, it's also affecting the red channel and the green channel. And if I pump up that saturation to 100%, you'll see that the red and the green both look like they've gained some luminance and a little bit of saturation. So let me just show you that. So particularly the red, you can see the red has really pumped up. Looks like it's become a bit more illuminated. And this is a really nice slider, the blue primary slider, used a lot in landscape photography, and this is to increase the oranges and that in sunsets. We use that slider quite a lot for that, and I'll show you when we do the editing shortly. But what happens now if we do the same thing with the green primary slider or the red primary slider? Well, we're going to see something very similar where we are going to get that global adjustment. It's affecting all three colors across our entire color space. So you can see that when I bring that down to zero saturation, it's affected all three of our primary colors. Same thing if I go up to 100%. And if we do the same thing with the red, again affecting all three of our primary colors. So where this is really useful is when we make our global adjustments to colors. You'll find using the calibration sliders to increase color and saturation are far more effective than using the vibrancy or the saturation slider, because we're only affecting certain number of colors in our color wheel, not everything at once. So looking at our color wheel now, if we go to our calibration tabs and we look at what these three different sliders are doing for red, green and blue, we're going to see how it affects all the colors when we do editing. So the first thing I'm going to go is down to the blue primary. If we pull that down to 0% on the saturation, what we see is that it has affected a lot more than the blue. It's actually affected across from aqua all the way up into those purples, as well as a little bit with the brightness to do and the saturation with the yellows and the reds. So let's have a look. If we pump that up, you can see the opposite, where it's increasing all of the saturation of this bottom half of the wheel. And that is, I would say, about a third, just over a third of the color wheel is affected by just the blue primary slider. If we pull down the green, we see very similar thing, but affecting different colors. And this is affecting all the yellows into the greens, into the aquas, and also seems to be desaturating a bit of the purples there. And if we increase, you can see it really pops out those yellows, oranges, and greens, and a bit in the aqua. And now that the red, we desaturate that. The red seems to be affecting a lot more of the colors a little bit more evenly, but again, really focusing on those purples, reds, oranges, really decreasing the saturation there. And if we increase it, opposite where we're getting the increase in the saturation. So you can see how these three sliders, when looking at calibration, affect a lot more than just red, green, or blue. It affects about 1/3 to 2/3 of the color wheel in colors. And this is why this is really great instead of using vibrancy or saturation sliders, because instead of affecting every single color, we can affect 1/3 of our colors and a certain range. So our warmer tones, our cooler tones, we really want to pop the warm tones in the sunsets. We can increase the saturation of our blues, which help to increase the vibrancy in the sky, and those pinks and reds that we get in sunsets. So these sliders are great for global adjustments and really will take your photos quite quickly from dull, boring, or flat to something quite vibrant. So think of these as global adjustments. I haven't even touched onto the hues that I'll get into when we jump into the editing of the photos, but purely just looking at the saturation, you can see the power that this will have on your editing. And lastly, I just want to jump across to the HSL slider, and now looking at the HSL slider, we can see if we decrease the saturation or increase the saturation for the reds, it's only affecting the red channel. Orange, exactly the same, only affecting the oranges. And I'm just going to go through all of them and see the big difference. Instead of affecting 1/3 of our colors, we are affecting a very small range of our color wheel. And this is why these are localized adjustments. This is if we have a very green rock or a very bright, intense color in our image, we can just reduce that color specifically and not affect the rest of our image. So think of the HSL sliders as very localized edits in terms of color, and use that on certain colors that are maybe too bright or too dull, just to pop them or reduce that color. And think of the calibration slider as affecting a wider range, wider gamut of images, of colors, so that we can do the editing. And then just reducing the blues and the purples and then the magentas. And those are all our colors for our color wheel. So very localized. I haven't got into hue, we'll get onto hue now, but that is just using the difference between using the HSL sliders and using the calibration sliders when editing. Okay, so jumping into our first image, I have this image of a rainbow over the mountains that we will be focusing on in our editing, and we will see what the difference between the calibration, the global adjustments, and the HSL sliders will be. So first thing I'm going to do is go down to the calibration sliders, and as I said earlier, the blue primary is very well used in landscape photography for editing, as it pops a lot of those reds you saw in those orange colors as well as the blues. So if I pull that right up to 100%, you can immediately see the difference it makes to that rainbow, as well as some of the blue in the clouds. So if I go down to 0 and I reset that and I pull it up again, really enhances and pops out those colors instead of with the saturation slider, which would just pull everything up. In terms of the hues now, you can decide whether you want it to be more towards the aqua tones. If we pull it down, you can see it's making the clouds and the color in the rainbow a lot more aqua. And if we pull our primary hue up, we then head towards more of the purple tones or the magentas, and you can see that in the clouds and the rainbow. So I think with the scene with the rainbow, we don't want to mess with the colors too much. However, I do really want to pop up that saturation to get that rainbow to pop up. Now if we look at that green primary, you can see that's affecting the yellows. So if you look over here, you zoom in there for you, and we look at those yellows, we can see the difference that green primary makes. So the green primary and the red primary, I would say be a lot more subtle with them. Don't oversaturate them too much. However, the blue primary, you can go quite heavy on that because it really pops out those right colors that we need for landscape photography, which would be those sunset colors, those blues in the sky. It's a great way to pop out those colors without oversaturating your image. And if we look at the reds, it seems to be focusing more on those orange colors. And we can just pull that down to something like that. So if we zoom in onto our rainbow now, and we look at before and after, so there we can see without the calibration slider on, and there we can see with adding those calibration effects. I think it's pretty obvious the difference it makes in terms of enhancing those colors and really bringing the colors of that rainbow out. And we haven't touched the vibrancy or the saturation sliders. Now we can go to the HSL slider and we can make a few tweaks or adjustments. As I said, this is more for localized adjustments. And what we can see here is in the top of the image is maybe the blues are a little bit too saturated. So we can click on saturation and we can use this little stop pointer, and wherever we click on that, it'll grab the colors, and if we slide our mouse, it will adjust the slider. So you can see if we increase the localize setting there for blue, it makes the blue very saturated, and if we decrease it, it reduces that saturation a little bit. So I would reduce the saturation just slightly for the blue in the clouds, so it looks a little bit warmer. And we can come to the hue now, and we can potentially make it slightly more towards the magentas. So it's not more aqua, slightly moving that blue towards the magentas. And this is where we're going to do our localized adjustments in just terms of tweaking our colors. So the next example I want to show you is a desert scene. A lot of oranges in the desert scene. However, to affect the oranges, we're going to adjust the calibration, the blue primary slider. Remember I said adjusting the blues. I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it really pops out those warmer tones when we edit. So coming down to our calibration slider, I'm going to go down to that blue saturation, pull it right up, and immediately massive difference. If you look, 0 saturation up to 100%, really pops out all those colors, those warm tones. We can, if we zoom in on this area, then bring up the saturation slightly of the reds and maybe adjust our hue to something a bit more towards the reds and away from those yellows. And if we look at the before and after, and the only thing I've done to this image is adjust the calibration sliders, and you can see a massive difference just between before and after. I haven't edited anything else on this image. This is the only thing I've changed, and that's already taken that image up a significant amount. Now I would go to the HSL curve, and while we're zoomed in there, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. We can maybe see we want to maybe lean towards more of those pinker tones. I like a little bit more of the pink and the reds in my editing as opposed to those yellows or oranges. And to do that, we can go to hue, we can use this little selector, and now we can adjust very slightly. And for HSL, very minor adjustments make a big difference in the end. If you go crazy with the HSL sliders, it looks very stylized or over edited or overcooked. So very light hand when playing with the HSL slider. And all I've done there is I've just reduced those oranges and reds and made them a little bit more towards the pinker tones instead of the yellower tones, and it still looks a little bit oversaturated, so I'm going to change to the saturation slider now, and I'm just going to pull down those oranges and those yellows just a little bit so that it doesn't look too oversaturated. Okay, and now we're just going to go back and have a look, and you can see how nicely it's made those colors. Now I can go in, I can edit the rest of the photo, but for the example of this video, I just wanted to show the difference between adjusting the global adjustments and localized adjustments. So the last image I'm going to show you is more of a classic landscape, or a seascape in this instance, with a lot of blues in the water and there's bright skies, and just show you how using the global and the localized adjustments we can tweak this image. Going to our calibration tab, going to look at global adjustments, again starting with the blue primary, always a great place to start, and pulling that right up. I think you can immediately see the difference. It is really popping out those blues in the water and the oranges in these rocks, which I absolutely love, and we're going to focus on enhancing those. But that's all I've done, pulled it up quite heavily to about 60, and if we zoom in and we look at before and after, something like that, we can see that those colors in especially that seaweed, those oranges in the seaweed have been enhanced quite a lot, and this nice aqua color in the water has also been enhanced quite a bit. So let's look at global adjustments at the reds, because I really want to highlight those colors in the seaweed and in the rocks at the back here, and I've pulled that up maybe, let's say, about 25, just to enhance those reds a little bit. To me, the reds are looking a little bit yellow. I just maybe want them again to be a little bit towards that pinker tones, or those deep oranges. So now that we've done our global adjustments, we're going to go to the HSL slider. I'm going to go to hue. I'm going to go to this color selector. I'm going to click on that seaweed, and I'm going to drag the slider a little bit more towards those redder tones. So now if we look at the before and after, we can see some nice reds popping now out of the seaweed, which contrasts nicely with the aqua in the water. Now if we look at, let's find a spot where we can look at the water a little bit. There we go. So you can see with our global editing, it's really popped that aqua, but maybe that's a little bit too aqua, so let's see if we maybe make that a bit more blue towards the purples. Move it up a little bit, something like that. And I really want to pop out those colors, so let's go to saturation. I maybe want to increase the saturation just of that aqua slightly. So if you look now at our before and after, you can really see how increasing just those global adjustments and some minor adjustments with the HSL slider has improved the colors in this image. I'll just show you here the oranges again. If we look at the oranges in the foreground on this rocks, really love what it's done and how it's popped out those colors. If it's a bit too much for you, you can just go again to HSL slider, do that localized color adjustment, bring it down, adjust the hue slightly to something that you like, and there you go, you got your final image. So I hope that was helpful for you. Hope you understood the difference now between the global and local adjustments, and this will help your editing and understanding of color theory. If you'd like to subscribe, please subscribe to my channel. I'll be bringing out a video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. and this will vary between editing tutorials like you've seen today, as well as in the field practical advice about composition and shooting landscapes. Cheers guys.